If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you've either played Into the Pit yourself or have already seen the spoilers. If not, this is your one spoiler warning. Turn back now. Into the Pit is one of my favorite FNAF games in a while, but as much as there is to love about the game, there's equally as much to be absurdly confused about when it comes to the game's continuity. I know some people will pretend that it's easy to understand and that it's what people have been saying for the longest time, but I assure you, the lore of this franchise is never that simple. If it was, theory videos wouldn't even be a thing anymore. But that's all beside the point. Today, we're here to talk about Into the Pit's most interesting Easter egg. On the first night of the game, if you stand completely still in Oswald's room for about 10 minutes, this shows up in your window. And in case it wasn't obvious enough by the design, going into the files, you can find the sprite right here. This is, without the shadow of a doubt, the Stitch Wraith. Although, it's also not the Stitch Wraith. At least, not in the way that we've always known it. In case anyone watching this hasn't read the books and doesn't understand what this is, I'll give you the spark notes. The Stitch Wraith is an endoskeleton that houses two souls, Jake and Andrew. Technically speaking, William Afton's soul is also in there, but that knowledge isn't necessary for this conversation. All you really need to know is that Jake and Andrew possess this thing, and that they specifically possess two parts of it in particular, the head and the battery. Eventually, Andrew's soul passes on, but the battery stays attached to the Stitch Wraith and still works the exact same even after this. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'll explain some of that as we go through the video. For now, let's get back on topic. Pulling the Stitch Wraith sprite up from the files allows us to get a much better look at it, without the weird lighting or the window blocking our view. And with this, you can notice that the design is off. Now, designs change across FNAF media all the time, and adapting something from a novel to a 2D sprite can very easily lead to artistic liberties being made. But this is a change that's a little too big for me to be comfortable chalking it up to just an artistic choice. This feels much more deliberate, like something you can't mess up so easily. Take a look at the illustration real quick. See this glowing battery on the Stitch Wraith's chest? That's not on this thing's sprite at all. There are 3 sprites for this thing in the files, and no matter which one you look at, the battery is very clearly missing. I'm willing to forgive certain design mishaps, but this isn't something as rudimentary as a missing button or the wrong amount of toes. This battery is essential to the Stitch Wraith, both its design and even its functionality. Despite having multiple souls inside of it at some point in the story, the Stitch Wraith can't move very well on its own. It needs the battery attached to it to power itself up. In the second to last Stitch Wraith stinger, Dr. Talbert takes a gun and fires 3 shots at the Stitch Wraith, one of them hitting the battery. This causes the energy to be sucked out of it, and the Stitch Wraith crumbles to the ground, unable to move at all until the soul inside of it is able to concentrate all of his leftover strength in the next and final epilogue. But even then, it struggles to do much of anything. We're told that it still has its battery in the last scene we see it in, and that its battery is recharged a little, just barely enough to walk. So even in its final moments, it still has its battery and still relies on it. So clearly, the fact that this battery is missing is odd. But is it unexplainable? Well, 2 ideas immediately come to mind to try and potentially explain this. First off, the nuclear option. The Stitch Wraith never had its battery in this universe to begin with. There's a lot wrong with this. First of all, this immediately breaks this game's continuity. It can no longer be in continuity with Fazbear Frights if the battery was never attached to it. Second, as I mentioned already, the Stitch Wraith can't really move without this battery, so there would have to either be another power source here somewhere, or we just have to assume that he no longer needs one in this universe. But the biggest issue with this, the most jarring thing about this option, is the fact that it would mean that Andrew was never a part of the Stitch Wraith in this universe to begin with. Like I said earlier, Andrew was possessing this battery before it was attached to the Stitch Wraith in the original story, and I have good reason to believe that he still does in this game. On Night 5, you can access a secret minigame where you play as a kid collecting balloons at a Fazbear location. I don't know off the top of my head which location this is. I think it's FNAF 1? Someone can correct me in the comments on that. Anyway, once you collect all 6 balloons, a big door opens, and inside of the new room, there's an animatronic dog. And once your character steps outside of the room, the dog chases after them and mauls them to death. This dog is almost certainly Fetch. Not only is it the only animatronic dog that we have in the franchise, but as the minigame ends, you can see CU appear at the top of the screen, which is also how the Fetch story ends. Granted, this design is obviously a lot different from Fetch's design, and despite the fact that this video spawned from me harping on design differences, I don't think this one actually changes that much. Anyway, The reason that I'm bringing all this up is because the battery that's attached to the Stitch Wraith comes from Fetch, and considering we see a kid get killed by him here, I'd be willing to bet that this kid is Andrew. Quick aside that I realized I should probably mention only after I finish the recording for this video. I've heard talk recently that this kid isn't actually Andrew, and that it's actually Greg, the main character of the Fetch story. My only real issue with this is that, to our knowledge, Greg never dies in this story. Sure, this could be implying that he died after the story, but we don't have any evidence to back that up. The only thing that we really have to go off of is the fact that this minigame is paired up with the other two Frights-related minigames, both of which telling a shortened and slightly altered version of To Be Beautiful and Count the Ways respectively. Despite the fact that I'm pretty big on pattern recognition, I don't think that that alone is enough to prove that this isn't Andrew. I don't think this actually changes anything about this theory, but I figured that it'd be best if I brought it up here before someone mentions it in the comments. So Andrew still possesses Fetch's battery. No, he doesn't possess Golden Freddy. Don't type that in my comment section. I know that at least one of you wants to. Don't do it. If Scott can kill my biggest theory, yours isn't safe either. Stay tuned, that's coming soon. Maybe in a week if I'm fast enough. So he still possesses Fetch. So why wouldn't the battery get attached to the Stitch Wraith's body? It happens at the same time as his head after all. Well, maybe it did get attached to its body. And if that's the case, then we're left with one other option. The Stitch Wraith, sometime after the end of the final Stitch Wraith stinger, removed its own battery. I can give you several reasons as to why I don't believe this. First off, as I said, it needs this battery to power itself. It can hardly move without it. But more importantly, at the end of the story, the Stitch Wraith isn't exactly going anywhere. The Stitch Wraith story ends with it sinking into the ball pit, and Jake losing awareness of his physical self. So even if he removed his battery for some reason, he's not moving anywhere in the first place. So how did he end up outside of Oswald's window? Well, this actually leads into a theory that's been circling around a lot ever since the release of Into the Pit. Loop theory. It goes a little something like this. First of all, Oswald is super dead. He died in the pit and is now constantly reliving all of his memories on loop, stuck in an eternal purgatory. This would explain why he knows and draws all the Fazbear animatronics, barring Foxy, without ever actually seeing any of them. A big piece of evidence to support this comes from one of the earliest endings you can get in the game. After playing hide and seek with Mike and Chip, and Pit Trap makes his first appearance, Oswald can straight up just leave. He can go out the front door of the pizzeria, and the game ends, just like that. Then, if you try to go back and do it again, Oswald refuses, and says, "Nope, you saw what happened last time." I don't think that's a fourth wall break or anything like that. It feels like he's just talking to himself. But the fact that he's even aware of it in the first place is concerning. It implies that he might be experiencing this over and over again, like he's stuck in a loop. And at the end of the Stitch Wraith stingers, this is the exact kind of thing that Jake is trying to help people with. Jake's story ends with him inside the mind palace of a girl named Millie, who is featured in Count the Ways from the first Fazbear Frights book. She also has a minigame of her own at Into the Pit. Jake asks Millie if she's lost, and then leads her to her grandpa's porch before disappearing. And after entering the house and embracing her grandfather, she feels at peace. Happy, even. After this, something starts happening to the ball pit in the real world. To quote the story directly, although the plastic balls weren't moving, suddenly one of them lit up. It lit up and turned from ruddy red to shining gold. Then it turned clear, like a sparkling crystal ball. Within the glistening glass orb, a tiny scene flared into view. The scene was that of a family Christmas. Laughing people gathered around a table near a Christmas tree. In the center of the group of people, a young girl dressed in all black smiled as if she hadn't smiled in a long time. Around this bright, clear ball and its inviting scene, other balls in the ball pit began morphing from filthy plastic to brilliant, transparent glass. Every glass ball lit up with its own little happy scene. Soon, all the plastic balls were shimmering. They all twinkled, like dazzling stars in a clear night sky. This is all Jake's doing. He's giving lost souls the peace that they needed to finally move on, erasing all the agony that had plagued them for all these years. And, well, if he's giving everyone else their happy ending, then maybe that's what's happening with Oswald. Maybe he's here to finally free him from the loop, and give him the rest he's been seeking for however long he's been trapped here. While I think that's close to making sense, in all actuality, it's not what's happening here. If it was, then the scene with the Stitch Wraith outside of his window would be totally different. First of all, Millie never sees the Stitch Wraith, not once. She's not approached by it. She's approached by Jake himself, a young boy who looked full of innocence. So if that's what's happening here, then why does Oswald see the Stitch Wraith? Second, and even more importantly, if this were the case, then this is where the game would end. Jake isn't just stalking these kids or anything like that. He's actively trying to help them. but if you try to approach the Stitch Wraith, it just disappears. That doesn't make any sense. That's not what we see Jake do in the story. So whatever's happening here doesn't line up with what we see in the epilogues. This Stitch Wraith is a complete anomaly. Not only does it not make any sense within the context of the game, it doesn't even make sense within the context of its own story. So if this Easter egg is important in any way at all, and I have a strong feeling that it is, then it completely breaks the continuity apart. So if Into the Pit is meant to be in continuity with the rest of the games, then the Stitch Wraith prevents it from being in continuity with the rest of the books, including the very book it was based on. And that was where I was originally going to end this script. Sure, there are more things that I could have brought up, like how the Stitch Wraith's head also doesn't match up between its sprite and its illustration, but that seemed like a small point that could have been chalked up to just an artist thinking it would look better like this. So this was gonna be the end. And then I thought of something. A third option. One that could, theoretically, bridge the gap that's stopping this game from being in continuity with both the books that it comes from and the games that it's meant to be a part of. Before I even tell you what this is, I need to preface all of this with something. I have full confidence with everything that I've said in this video up to this point. I think that it's logically sound, I think that it has substantial evidence to back it up, and I think that recent things that Scott has said help solidify it even further. I'm more than willing to fight on this hill, but this next part, not so much. I struggle to even call this a theory. It's more of a hunch than anything else. I don't have any real evidence of it, as it would revolve around a situation that could hypothetically take place after the end of the final Stitch Wraith stinger. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if this is possible. But if it is, it might actually explain why we see the Stitch Wraith in the manner that we do in this game. And potentially, it could explain any further instances of it in the future of these games. You see, at the end of the story, there's more than just one person inside of the Stitch Wraith. It's not Andrew, and it's not Afton. It's Eleanor. Eleanor reveals herself to be the main antagonist of the Stitch Wraith singers, and for the most part, of Fazbear Frights as a whole. And in the final chapter, Jake is able to seal her away inside of her memories. Not in a happy memory like he did for the dead kids, but in the most miserable memory that he could find, trapping her inside of her own agony and storing all of that inside of his endoskeleton. But Eleanor isn't exactly a stranger to agony. Far from it, in fact. During her first encounter with the Stitch Wraith, she literally absorbs all of the agony inside of Jake's spirit, before willingly joining the Afton amalgamation. Which is a can of worms that I will not be explaining in this video. So if she's able to absorb agony, then how long can she really be held in place by this bad memory? Theoretically, not forever. And when Jake starts bouncing between mind palaces and the pit and helping the spirits of the children move on, there's no one left to inhabit the body of the Stitch Wraith. So, theoretically, if Eleanor is able to grow stronger from the agony that she's stuck inside of, then all of a sudden, she has free reign of the Stitch Wraith's body. And all of this agony that she has could potentially even power the endoskeleton without the need for its battery. Theoretically, if all of that is possible, well, I think it would explain just about everything there is to explain about the Stitch Wraith's appearance in this game. There's no battery because Eleanor doesn't need there to be a battery anymore. She's able to power it with agony. And speaking of agony, that's why the Stitch Wraith is watching Oswald rather than trying to help him. Eleanor is passively siphoning the agony he's emitting from his situation. His father is replaced by Pit Trap and no one else seems aware of it. This even leaves open the possibility of loop theory being real, and if anything, it just strengthens it. The more loops Oswald has done, the more agony Eleanor could be siphoning from him. This is all pure speculation at the end of the day. I don't actually know if it's possible in regards to how agony works. I don't really know what the limits of agony are in the first place. Or Remnant, for that matter. Sometimes it just feels like they literally do whatever Scott wants them to do at any given time. But if you understand this more than I do, then be sure to leave a comment and let me know if you think I missed anything. There's a lot of things to see in this game, and it's always possible that there's something none of us have even found yet. Just don't try to convince me of anything using only cut content. Things like that were cut for a reason, and we'll probably never know what those reasons actually are. That's all for me right now though. Make sure you leave a like and stay subscribed, because next week, I'm gonna talk about the thing that I suddenly really don't want to talk about anymore. See you guys then.